Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this fantastic panel of fantastic role-playing game creators. We have a lot of questions for them. I certainly have a lot of questions for them, given I have never personally built a role-playing game, as I have found most people have not. And I would like to know a little bit of the nitty-gritty, how it's done. But first and foremost, let's talk to our panelists. Let's find out who they are. Let's find out what they do. And I'm going to start from the top left of the screen and go around clockwise. Amanda, who are you and what do you do?
That's me, right?
Yeah, yes, because other Amanda is just Manda.
Okay,
for
good.
the sake of clarity, and that was very, very practical of her.
It was.
Nice.
Hi, I'm Amanda Call. I primarily work as an illustrator in the tabletop gaming industry, but I'm also part of the Skirmisher Gaming development group. So I do a lot of development of RPG systems and modules and playtesting behind the scenes.
Awesome. And Manda.
Hi, everyone. I am Manda Cherry at Manda the Ginger, thegingervillain.com. I am mostly an author of contemporary and historical urban fantasy, superhero fiction, and the occasional space opera. But also, I was part of the writing team behind the traditionally published role-play game, Acute Paranoia, and am currently working on developing my own game that rubs the serial numbers off a certain favorite magical property that shall remain nameless.
Now, I'm going to have questions later.
I mean,
beyond the ones I'm going to have for everybody else. Like you and I, we should talk.
We should talk. Yeah, let's have a chat. Let's roll some dice.
Darren.
Yes. Hi, I'm Darren Watts. I am the former president and owner of Hero Games, most notably for this discussion, publisher of Champions, the superhero role-playing games.
Yay!
Thank you. Yay. I also was the president of Indie Press Revolution and a couple of other things. About 10 years ago, I got out of the owning things business and returned to the freelancing life. And most recently, I have worked for Star Trek, Doctor Who, and currently working for Greater Than Games on the Sentinels of the Multiverse line.
Since I have a bow tie on, I suppose I should complete the ensemble. And
very nice.
Those are cool.
Yep.
Excellent.
Todd.
Hello. I am Todd Downing. I am an author and world builder and designer. I have owned and operated Deep Seven Press for about 20 years, 22 years actually now. We are the publishers of the 1PG economy line of beer and pretzel role-playing games, as well as some larger and more those kind of things like Aeroflight and Airship Daedalus, and we were the publishers of the official Red Dwarf role-playing game. And that kind of thing. And so, yeah, that's what I do and why I'm here.
That is amazing. And just because moderators go last, I am Rafael Bocamazzo, better known as Dr. B for long Italian name reasons. I am a doctor of clinical psychology, non-practicing doctor of clinical psychology, because I do nothing but policy and education these days as the clinical director of the gaming-focused mental health nonprofit TakeThis.org. Additionally, I'm also an expert on the applied use of role-playing games in clinical and learning settings. I teach clinicians and teachers how to do that. And I am one of the co-authors of a best-selling charity module for Dungeons and Dragons called Gardens of Fog that benefits my organization. And we introduced a new unofficial cleric based on our Psychomancer mascot. They're the therapists of D&D, and they're really fun to play. But let's get into these questions. Like, as someone who has never actually built an RPG, there are so many that exist already. Why would you do that? Why are you building your own?
I'll be honest. In part, I'm here to, or part of my discussion for this is to, if not dissuade you from doing it on your own, to dissuade you from. Here, let me put it this way: to dissuade you from starting from scratch, right? Because there are so many systems, so many games that are out there, so many of them are licensable and hackable and come with their own audiences that already exist. It's extremely difficult for a brand new game these days with no connection to anything else in the industry to get any sort of market penetration, to get any sort of publicity or just general awareness. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm saying it's brutally difficult, and it is frequently much easier to take a system, to take something that already exists and modify it to match your vision of what your game is like. And so I think that's something I'll probably be coming back to over and over again in this, the ways in which you can do that specifically, and the ways that you can look for something that is hackable and modifiable to match your vision, as opposed to simply trying to start flat-footed and create a brand new game in a 50-plus-year-old industry.
I am going to dovetail off what Darren said. The reason not to is to try to make money. If you want to make a game and have it catch fire and get played on streams and make a bunch of money and make a name for yourself, that is not the reason. The reason for me is that I have yet to find exactly the game I want to play. I want character creation to be based in X, and everything seems to be basing it in Y. I want stories that exist in a world that has this, that, and the other, and not these other things. And so I started building a game of my own with a rule set I liked, the kind of dice I wanted to use, in a world that I enjoyed creating and expanding, with character creation in a way that I found useful and interesting and didn't involve a whole lot of math. I do not play games to do math, Shadowrun.
But you can buy D6 by the kilo.
And I have. Please note that my best friend in the world is Shannon McGuire, and I think she owns more dice than any other human on the planet. We have a lot of dice in this world. But to me, the reason to build a game is because you haven't found the perfect game for you to play. Build a game that you want to play. Maybe someone else out there also wants to play it and is willing to slip you $20 in order to do that. But don't build a game for any reason other than something you want to sit down in front of and draw joy from.
Sure.
Okay. What, Todd, I and Amanda, I know both of you have worked on independent systems. I know, Todd, you have co-designed an independent system from scratch, and it sounds like we've got two modes of thought on this one. On one hand, similarly to what I say when people tell me they want to get their doctorate in clinical psychology, I'm like, why? Don't, no, please. It's because basically it's going to fight back. It's going to be 6 or 7, 5 to 7 years of your life, and you got to be passionate enough to do it, because you're going to lose out on a lot. Why create an independent system?
Amanda, you want to go?
Yeah, well, I'll say that one of the things is that I haven't set out to start one on my own, but being a part of groups where we have made our own. On the one hand, from an actual from like a marketing and business standpoint, hacking and making modules for other people's licensable games is a good way to get started and a good way to get your feet wet in that type of design. But there is a limit to how much, if you do want to turn this into your livelihood, if you do want to turn this into a viable business, there is a limit that you're going to hit on how far you can take somebody else's property. And eventually, if you want it to be something that will be a long-term project, a long-term property, you'll have to develop your own thing. And that's just the way that kind of marketing thing goes. But also, it's really infectious. Like,
I would be careful about that word in the context of the last, 15 months.
Okay, different word that means the same thing. If you're part of a group where you have people who are creating games, you end up thinking that way and wanting to express yourself creatively that way too. So even though I'm not taking point on any of Skirmisher's projects right now, anytime that we are in a development session and we start batting around ideas of like, how do we solve this? How do we want to develop this? And then you start getting ideas. I start getting ideas.
Right.
I for the longest time, I kept on coming to our development meetings being like, well, I'm not a game designer, but, and eventually after providing enough feedback, everyone else at these meetings is like, Amanda, you need to stop saying that because you are a game designer now. Like, you have made enough of these really good decisions and provided enough of this really good feedback that you can't say that anymore. You need to stop. And that's just kind of the thing, is that if you discover that creating games is something that brings you joy and you really enjoy expressing yourself that way, then you're compelled to do it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And working, like I said, working on other people's material, working in a group that way is an excellent way to, kind of like sharpen your own tools to get ready to do that on your own.
Absolutely.
Right? Like it's a much kind of, easier, softer landing place kind of thing to have your first failures, and you're going to have failures in doing it.
Absolutely.
It's a difficult, like I said, it's a very difficult thing to start flat-footed to just, have something
it does
spring forward from your brain fully formed.
Exactly. It does take a long time. I mean, to be fair, even though Deep 7 has only been around since 1999, I think the earliest experiments with what became the XPG system that we now use for most of our premium products, I mean, we're talking 30 years ago.
Yeah, sure.
For some of the first playtesting, it started out as I was a retailer at the time, and we wanted we kind of were kit bashing a house system that was an unholy amalgam of like Cyberpunk 2020 and D6 Star Wars, because we love different aspects of the two systems. Sure. and how they kind of, stacked attributes and skills. And, we turned it on its head and hacked it open with a butcher knife and sewed it back together. And we ended up with what we have now. But it's taken a long time, and it's taken iterations upon iterations to do it.
So, okay. So there's this tension between a couple of things that y'all have told me. One, this idea of creative expression, of getting and the play experience that you want, that there's this balance between the absolute ridiculous amount of time and effort it takes to design this system, balanced against the playing experiences you've had versus the playing experience you want. But additionally, designing your own system gives you the entrepreneurial flexibility to have total creative control over what you're doing. Usually, unless you're licensing somebody else's product, without the stipulations of various licensure requirements, because of course different companies are.
Well, and keep in mind, there's two different kinds of licenses here as well, right? There's licensing mechanics and licensing setting.
Same
right?
one.
And both of those do manifest differently in the game, right? Like if I license a mechanic that I like from a rule set or whatever, and use that to build my own system on top of, to hack, basically, like frequently for something I'm not even paying for, like Blades in the Dark or something that has an open license to be hacked. I have considerably more leeway and probably considerably less, physical support than if I am in fact actually going to somebody who's got a full-on license IP or something that I'm actually manipulating. And I say this as somebody who's worked for Star Trek, and Doctor Who, both of which are nightmares, to manage. Not because anybody there is bad at what they do or anything, but because there's just so much of it to to maneuver through. And when you send something, right, like if I send a product to the BBC to get approval for Doctor Who, I know that in the same amount of time it takes them to read my book and determine that it's okay, they could have said yes to 50 different coffee mugs and T-shirts and bed sheets and peanut butter and whatever the heck else is going out there with Doctor Who on it, right? So I am always at the bottom of the pile, because it takes time to read my thing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
Red Dwarf was exactly the same way.
Yeah, there's a bunch of problems that come specifically from IP that have nothing to do with mechanics.
So the fact that you have to work with a different company of various sizes and bureaucracy is in of itself by its very structure.
Sure.
And they get veto over any of the material.
Right. Because, you're working on their stuff.
Exactly.
Right.
You're playing in their sandbox.
But having the name on there helps me sell it, right? I mean, it's a trade-off that I'm willing to make for frequently for the kind of thing that I'm doing.
So, okay, then you've made the poor life choice of designing your own system, and because you've had so playing experiences, you don't want to minor in math to add up the bricks of D6s from either say Shadowrun or the old West End Star Wars. And you want to create your own system. What's that process like? And suddenly I can see nightmares coming back to every one of our panelists.
Sure, right, yep. Honestly, it does start with your own experiences. Some of it will be a response to the games that you have played, right? And when you found something that didn't work for you, or something that surprisingly did, that you unexpectedly said, oh, I have a very strong reaction to this kind of mechanic, or to this kind of, promoted style of interplay at the table, right? Like the assigning of roles at a table or something like that. That's not a pure mechanic, but that is just kind of like an assumed mechanic, right? If you have a reaction that is strong, either positive or negative, that's frequently a place to start and say, okay, I really love Shadowrun, but I wish it had fewer dice. Might be a perfectly good place to begin the sketching on your notepad, right? Of okay, what would that mean to what's the parts of Shadowrun that I do like that don't involve
I
all
have
these
a
basic
version
dice?
of Shadowrun that I have distilled to a single page of rules.
Yeah, see,
and
then
it's-
that page might be a thing you could build
I
up
will,
from.
I will send it to you. And I did it because I was going to be running a one-shot at a convention, and I didn't want to spend all day rules lawyering for people, and I didn't want to lock out people who had never played the game before. I wanted to give them the flavor of the world. I wanted to give them a shade of what the mechanics look like, but I wanted them to be able to bring the dice out of their Monopoly game from home, if that was the only dice they had, and sit down at a table and taste this world and taste what this cyberpunk plus magic storytelling via D6 as a decision engine felt like. So I cherry picked the rules that I liked. I chose some forms of characters that we decided not to deal with in that game because I'm not going to spend all day doing rigging and decking rolls if we're just playing a one shot. Right. And I was able to distill that rule set down to something small and manageable that if someone decided they really loved it, they could go buy the whole book and see how much more meat there was. But that's how the first thing I ever did as far as designing was kit bashing Shadowrun to make it accessible to people who had never encountered it before.
And that is absolutely designing as well. Kit bashing is, there's no shame to that, right? There's no oh, that's a lesser accomplishment than pulling something complete. No, of course.
Absolutely not. Because also you could very easily try to do that and have it completely fail. You could have accidentally stripped out what made it function, but you had enough of a design sense to not do that, to identify what it was that worked and then just take that part out.
Right.
Exactly.
And what works for me running a game may not be what works for you running a game. The mechanics that I prefer to rely on as a GM and as a storyteller are what I built into that because I knew I was going to be the one running that game. But then moving forward, if someone else wanted to use it, I would ask them to playtest my little rule sheet to make sure it works for them as a GM. Some people are very dice heavy. Some people are very combat heavy. And that's not the way I run a game. So there may not be a mechanic built in there that's going to work for you.
Okay. So I'm still stuck on the idea that you actually distilled Shadowrun down to a one-page thing because
I am going to find that document. And
that's amazing.
I'm going to call sorcery and say that we must put that page in the dunking stool, and if it floats,
right? Yeah.
But so how do you do this? I mean, okay, you start with this idea that there's things you like, there's things you don't like, but it seems like the golden land or the ultimate expectation for a role-playing game is to design something that's flexible enough to work for just about anybody. Just, making it crunchy enough for the rule lawyers, making it simple. And there's already pushback on this. Okay, lay it on me.
Well, no, it's attempting to satisfy every potential RPG audience member is a path to failure, right?
Yeah.
There are games that are designed to be generic, that are designed to be, like multi-setting. Hero is one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even then, a hero game has a certain flavor to it because of the mechanics and everything that's in the game.
Yep.
Right, and there will be people. Yes, you can cover a wide range of them, but no individual thing that Hero is doing is going to satisfy the way that a game that is completely 100% designed for a specific experience, right? Like if you're trying to capture a specific subgenre of cyberpunk or whatever, and are designing specifically to that goal, and that's what your game does, eventually your game will be better at doing that than any generic system that's trying to, bodge things in to make it work.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so-
almost. Go ahead, Amanda.
Well, I was going to say that's actually the thing that's the guiding principle when you're designing is what is the experience that you're trying to create.
Right. Who's the
And-
player?
Right.
Right.
Who's the player? What are they trying to get out of it? Because you can have completely different types of mechanics and types of games to support that type of experience. So you have a game like For the Queen, which there are no dice. Literally all you do is draw cards and you ask each other questions and you tell a story together. And it creates this very intense, emotional, interpersonal drama-driven storytelling experience, which is a really cool game. But it is absolutely not the same type of game as I want to have a game where I roll lots of dice and lots of crunch, and I go up to the dragon and I hit it with a sword.
Shoot monsters and have it be tactically sound. And
These are not the same experience.
Right. Now, once again, I'm going to jump in and disagree with myself slightly on this because we're specifically here talking about superhero games. And I would argue that superheroes in particular as a genre are such a broad genre that generic games or games that can handle a very wide range of genres within their material turn out usually to be the best superhero games because superhero stories can go anywhere. Right? Like a superhero story may have robots one week and time travel back to have cowboys the next week. And then we're off into space to do this. And then we've got magic over here doing that, right? There's so many things that fit into the superhero genre because superhero stories as a genre are such an acquisitive genre. They, pick up everything in their path, right? And make it part of them. That a generic system for supers, I think, is almost one of the better answers that you're going to find, unless something like Masks, where you're drilling down into superheroes and saying, I want to tell a specific kind of superhero story, right? Masks tells the story of teenage superheroes learning to use their powers better than any other game I've ever seen to tell that one story. But if you try to do other kinds of superhero stories in Masks, you'll find the system fighting you.
Right.
So, okay, this isn't in the list of questions I gave you, but it just occurred to me that given the heavy emphasis of personal reward that you're talking about, essentially crafting the experience that you would have wanted to have, were there any aha moments that just really stuck with you along the way of either designing for someone else, designing for yourself, that just stand out as these watershed moments that have furthered your career along intellectually, in whatever context?
Wow.
For me, it was sort of discovering it. This actually kind of ties into what we were just talking about, how to do the world building in a way that it both offers boundaries and opportunities. You're not building a sandcastle, you're building a sandbox. And you're letting the players know if that sandbox has a Tonka truck in it, and if that sandbox has a pail and a shovel in it, and if that sandbox has rocks or bones buried underneath it. And you want to give that much information and put some variety of limit around your world without being limiting. Without limiting the storytelling potential of the person that picks that game up and says, I'm going to share this with my friends. I'm going to share this with my people the way I want to do it. So you have to provide both structure and freedom in the same tome.
So hold on. You're telling me that to have a fun experience, I have to understand the limits of the game?
Yes, and that doesn't mean you can't go beyond them. It doesn't
That sounds
mean you
awfully
can't throw a
restrictive.
rule out and break it. You are absolutely welcome to break any rule you understand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what's
Right.
the advantage of that? I mean, I can imagine a lot of I would say myopic fans getting angry at the idea of limits being placed upon them. Of course, coming from a mental health perspective, framework is very important for all of our stuff. But let's pretend I don't understand anything about that. Why give me limits?
Have you ever been to Costco?
I avoid it if possible. I consider
Okay.
Costco the first circle of autism hell.
I believe you. If you walk into Costco and you're looking for barbecue sauce, you're going to have one or two kinds of barbecue sauce on the shelf. Where if you walk into a mainstream grocery store and you're looking for barbecue sauce, you're going to have 18 varieties of barbecue sauce on the shelf. And at that moment, executive paralysis can strike, and you may never leave with barbecue sauce because it's harder to make a decision in the absence of limits.
Where's the
than it
report
is
button? I'm feeling
in the
called
presence
out.
of limits.
Yeah, right.
So providing that structure actually makes it easier to be creative within those bounds. If you give somebody completely open-ended, you can do anything and everything you want.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard. That's really hard.
By
But if you
claiming, right, by
Go ahead.
claiming that you have a genre at all, you're already inserting limits.
Right.
It's put in a limit by saying this is a story about superheroes.
Orson Welles famously said, "The enemy of art is the absence of limitations."
Right.
I mean, it's by putting any kind of framework, you are framing something.
Oh, you and Orson Welles.
It's not like you don't know.
Oh, I know. I know. But so the take home message I'm getting from all of this is that, one, you can't really design something that is going to be everything to everybody. There's
Right.
always going to be ornery fans that are looking for a different experience and just come up to you and are going to nitpick something and just say worst RPG ever. And
Yes.
just annihilate you because it's just not their bag. So instead, you know what your audience is, what you're shooting for in terms of an audience. You know what your goals are, and you try and hit that.
Mhm.
And at the same time, with the understanding that any definition essentially defines the sandbox that everybody is playing in. And you strike a balance between making it accessible and defined without making it too restrictive to be useful.
Right.
How do you do that? That sounds awfully hard.
Magic.
How much time have you got?
Magic. Listen, we're not talking about Shadowrun again. But no, that strikes me as a really hard balance to establish, because let's say you're someone who just very type A personality, you need a lot of definition yourself. And maybe you over define things. How do you discover that in the process?
Playtesting.
Play testing.
Yeah.
But that means
Absolutely.
you have to hear criticism.
You do.
Yes.
I don't want to hear
And multiple
criticism.
types of playtesting. There's playtesting with
Right.
you present. There's playtesting with you not present. There's playtesting when
Mhm.
you're hiding in another room.
There's playtesting where you just hand someone a printed out Word
Right,
document
exactly,
and
yeah.
then you don't speak, and then you just take notes while they flounder around with it,
a
whatever
copy of
you
me
wrote.
does not come with every game. I can't explain
Right.
this to
Right.
you, right? Like you have to
With
figure it
the
out from what I
Cam
wrote.
in the corner.
And
Yeah.
if you can't, then I have screwed up, right?
Right.
So that's,
Haven't done my job.
So okay, but so what's that like? Because I mean that getting the creative process, for anybody who's never really engaged in the creative process, it's a humbling experience.
sure. Yes.
And something that you could find, you could be writing this and you're like, oh my God, I'm so brilliant. Look at this thing I created. Look at the sheer brilliance on this page. That comma is perfectly placed. Everyone will understand this. And then what happens?
And then you send it to your agent and you find out none of that is true.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Plan does
I
not survive
don't
contact with
know
the
a
enemy.
single creative that would actually say that.
I've never,
Yeah,
I've never said that. And I
Not more
can't
than
imagine.
once, anyway.
Yeah.
We're more the type to be like, this is rubbish. I must send it to someone who can make it better.
Yeah.
So, how do you do that? That has got to be an absolutely nerve-wracking and humbling experience to send all this concept that you've spent, in some cases, years developing
Mhm.
out to people, and just to have them rip apart various things.
So real talk, I will probably do the first 5 to 10 play tests of this system. I've done a few with the words I've stolen, and now I'm filing the serial numbers off. I will do the first several with my very closest friends, people who I can trust to be honest but kind, people who I can trust to give me the positive feedback and say, this is what really works. And then the constructive feedback to say, this didn't work for me. And
Mhm.
someone I'm able to have a two-way conversation with as to why and how to discover if it's a them thing or a game function thing.
Right.
And I will have started to feel really, really good about playing with my friends under a certain rule set before I ever let a professional or a stranger touch it.
Right.
Yep.
Unless again, if it's something, if they've hired me to write for their IP, then I don't have a choice, and I just send it to the editor and cross my fingers and wait for my paycheck. But if it's something that I am creating myself, it is like a newborn baby. You show it to your nearest and dearest first. You don't trust it with just anybody until
Thrust
you're
it out
sure.
into public.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? No.
An experienced and well-trained playtest group that understands what it is that you're looking for out of a playtest is worth its weight in platinum. Absolutely. 100%.
Absolutely.
I have spent 25 years, working on mine, and they're an absolute godsend. So
Yeah. Absolutely. Same.
So you're saying that what you need to find people who understand the meaning of supportive critique.
right.
Yes.
Mhm.
Or teach it to them, right? I mean, once
Yeah.
again, you can, bring somebody in and show them what it is that you actually need from them,
Right.
But it's a teachable skill, but they need to have that skill one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are the first things y'all are looking for in terms of feedback with your games? You mentioned the idea of going in with some sort of being able to either expect them to know how to give this kind of feedback, because it sounds like it's a skill,
Mhm.
or being able to instruct them on the type of feedback that you need. How do you do that if you've never done that before?
If I've never taught it
If
before,
I've
or I've
never
never
sought this sort of feedback before, on a system, what do I teach people to do?
I think the best way that you can learn it is by joining in with people who are doing it for other people.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
It is a skill that gets handed along. And so
Right.
you can attend a convention that's got a protospiel or something like Metatopia or something like that, where you're participating in the playtests of products coming from professionals who have brought their product here specifically to get access to a high-end playtest group. And you sit in and join a group of people who have been doing it for years and watch what they do. Talk to watch them talk to the creator, watch them talk to the, and find out the kind of questions that the creator is looking for, right? Like every playtest should have a purpose, right?
Mhm.
Whatever it is. And you at no point do you sit down with a game and just say, here, splat, figure that out,
Yeah.
right? Like hopefully there is something that the writer, the designer is working on specifically
Right.
that they want to know. Right.
Yeah.
And
Ask
making sure
specific
that
questions.
that those specific questions are made
Yep.
clear to the players, and then they can, give the feedback that you want. Right. It's something you get better at as you practice it. And there are plenty of places to practice it live. So,
Oh God,
Yep.
there's that mistake thing again. Oh, there's that horrible thing.
There's some good guidelines for how to give good feedback, though, that you can keep in mind.
Sure.
And
Yep.
and that is some of the most simple and straightforward ones are to make sure that it is specific, that the feedback that you are giving is about something specific, that it is relevant. So the feedback you are giving has to do with what they are looking for
Mhm.
in developing this game, and that it is actionable. So something that there is actually something they can do about it. So if it's
Right.
just like, oh, I don't like this. Okay, but what can I do to make you like it? I don't know. I just don't like it. Well, that's
Right.
not helpful.
The difference between I didn't enjoy that and the combat turn taking was a little confusing and hard to follow.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Like you want it to be specific, and you want it to be relevant to something you can go in and tweak as a designer to change the game experience for the better for the next time you play test.
Whenever possible, make sure that they are keeping their critique, their criticism to description of the problem and not offering you a solution.
Okay.
Right? Because you're making your game. You're not making their game. Right? So they can say, oh, we had a problem with this. And you say, oh, yeah, I'll take a look at that again. But if they say, you know what you should do? Completely change, get rid of this and add more dice so that, Manda has more dice to roll in her game, kind of thing. That's usually the wrong answer. Right? Like their answer is usually wrong. But when they say that there's a problem, they're almost always right. Right? Like their batting average on that question is much higher than the batting average on how to fix it. It's your job to fix it.
Right.
So I just had an off the wall question for Amanda. I'm really curious about this because you're coming in this with the experience of an illustrator.
Mm-hmm.
And an illustrator's perspective is very different than, let's say, a writer's perspective, someone who exclusively writes. How does that, having a somewhat unexpected skill set, how does that inform your creative process when it comes to offering feedback on this stuff?
I think part of it is that I do really have that skill set of communicating back and forth towards a goal is highly refined in myself. Just in that it's like if I'm working on a freelance project for somebody, I may have very minimal instruction. So we need to communicate back and forth a whole lot to get toward that goal. And having that kind of mindset where I have to basically read people's minds to be like, what do you actually want this to look like?
But, Amanda, could you make it, I don't know, more designery?
Cooler. It's got to be cooler.
It's gotta look cooler. Yeah.
I don't know, y'all. I do have to shout out to the illustrators in the world, Amanda, etc. When I turned in my stuff for Paranoia, and then it came back with art, like someone made visual representations of shit I pulled out of my brain, like mind blown. And I will say that if you are a person who is looking to design a game and you don't do the visual art thing, perhaps you should look for a partner, because really that visual addition, it changes everything. And quite frankly, having someone draw something that you wrote is neat.
It's really cool.
Well, if you're talking about bringing a product to market, you absolutely need to have top-notch art on the cover. You absolutely need to have at least browsable art inside. It might be a higher ratio or a lower ratio to the written word, but you need to have something that's going to keep them thumbing through it and looking through it, and to the point where they're going, okay, I'm going to
and make them understand what the game is about. This is the world.
Exactly. It's all about selling the image.
Yeah.
And not to go all capitalist on you, but pay them.
Yeah.
Either bring them on as a willing partner, taking an equal risk and getting an equal reward, or show them the money up front. Hire them, commission them, pay them. Don't ask your artist to do it for exposure. Don't ask your artist to do it because it's cool. Don't ask your artist to do it because they're your bestie. Pay them.
Yep.
But I have an entire recipe book on how to cook and eat exposure. It has not sold well because I was unfortunately promising exposure, but that
people die from exposure.
I'm not saying the recipes are nutritious. But okay, so let's there's been a growing trend within especially within the tabletop RPG community that has been really especially in the last couple of years, critically assessing some of the influential source material that has fed into tabletop RPGs. I want to give a shout out to my buddy Gabe Hicks at Gabe James Games, who, as far as I know, created the first ancestry-based rule set, at least that I know of, that went away from the idea of racial essentialism, that, because you are a certain race in a game, you have certain features, because it's reductionist in terms of what we see. And we have all these coded coded references to colonialist stereotypes that still exist throughout all of the games that we play, because they're all influenced by the same source materials. I mean, let's not even get into Lovecraft. I mean, my God. So how do you acknowledge some of the problematic history of the source material and address it while still making a fun game that people find recognizable?
I think you have to be transparent and upfront about it, right? Like you
Absolutely.
have to have that discussion within the text of the game.
Mhm.
The amount that you have in it kind of, certainly can vary and can kind of depend on the lens that you're looking at it through. I've written, I co-wrote Pulp Hero, Golden Age Hero, Golden Age Champions. So stuff set in specific time periods. In which we just basically say up front, we are frequently drawing from some pretty questionable material, from some pretty, to modern eyes, shocking material. And we're having none of that here, right? Like there's no, in the world of Golden Age Champions, racism only exists to the extent that you want to tell a story about that in your table. Right, like there's no mandate to include that. There is no mandate for misogyny. There is no mandate for any of those things, and you basically just dismiss it in the page, right?
Right.
Or you may be writing a game that is actually taking that on, right? In which case, then it becomes kind of like the full-on subject of your game. And if you're a brilliant genius like Julia Bond-Ellingbo, you write, Steal Away Jordan, and write an entire game confronting the issue of American slavery. In 50 pages or whatever, and you just knock it out and crush it. And that's what the game is in fact making that, centered. So
I like
Right.
the way that Blue Rose handles it, where they're very much about, this is fantasy. This is not some colonialist version of history. This is fantasy. And as such, you leave all that baloney at the door.
Right.
You can play a fox. You can play an owl. You can you should play a queer person, but like they're just very upfront with, this is the world you're walking into.
Right.
And if this world is not for you, close the book and go home.
Right.
Because we just don't invite that into this game space, and it is right up front, and it is advertised as such. But in so many ways, it looks like that sort of classic medievalist fantasy that we all are familiar with. But, 3 pages into the core source book, that is not where you
not what
are.
we're doing.
It's
Right,
so
exactly,
subversive. It's delightfully subversive.
I love it. I love it.
Absolutely.
I need to play it more. I've only played it a few times. I've got the book sitting 3 feet from me right now. I'm like, I need a gaming group. I need to stand for this to be over.
Well, I mean, we're seeing more and more source material come from historically marginalized people that are representing historically marginalized voices. I mean, I don't know if any of you are following the Kickstarter for Into the Motherlands.
Yes.
But
Absolutely.
Following with many dollars.
Right, yeah.
Good. I could not be happier for all of their success, topping $350,000 on that Kickstarter.
Amazing.
And the material itself is actively anti-colonialist and Afrocentric, futuristic punk. And there are so many questions people have of like, how can you actually remove colonialism from this stuff? And so there's almost this. It's so embedded that to remove this concept confuses people.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
And so how for especially from those of you who haven't said anything, like how do you do it in your games?
Well, I can't say that we have removed those elements. I can say that in most of our games, especially the one we just released, Grimworld, takes place in kind of a Regency era dark fantasy, but it's global, and so that means it contains elements like the transatlantic slave trade and war, and all kinds of things like that. And what we do is we say, look, here's here's how the world is. Don't be afraid to do something different with your character. It's also up to the group what you choose to address and what you choose to discard.
Right.
You
It's
know,
almost
you don't
have a session 0.
exactly. And then we kind of lead by example by putting in over 100 NPCs that are not just all a bunch of white guys.
Right.
You know, pulling from
Demonstrate
all kinds
with
of
your
world
game.
cultures.
With the actual,
Exactly. Yeah.
and include quality safety tools, right?
Right.
Jacqueline Brick
Mhm.
wrote an outstanding set for Vampire, for example.
Yes.
That is the Onyx Path books that are tremendous. So,
And we're even seeing some of that stuff in really major releases. I know that Dungeons and Dragons Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft included some fantastic stuff that I was looking at it, of course, mostly from a mental health lens, but they were quite overt, and shout out to the team on that one, about avoiding mental health tropes within the horror genre that are often so rampant and marginalizing. So
Kids on Bikes also a wonderful small
Yes,
press
it's very good,
games,
yes.
handles that very well.
Any others that you think really do this well to avoid some of these marginalizing tropes? Boy, the crickets on this one, I think that was part of the problem. That
I will say a thing that I am very conscientious of is, as I look around this panel, I see a lot of white cisgender people. Sometimes my best advice is to not. Like, if that's not your lane, maybe that's not your thing to take on.
Don't write other people's stories.
Yeah,
Right.
Don't write other people's stories. Don't create a world in which people with marginalizations you do not share are going to feel poorly represented or spoken for.
Right.
Do not try to speak
support
for
the people
someone
who
you're
are
not.
doing it. Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Hire them if you have the budget. Work with them if you can, or point people in their direction. I am queer, I am disabled, but I am also white and cisgender and financially privileged. And there are things I feel I shouldn't touch. There are places that I don't go in my creations. I either find someone who understands that from the inside, or I very honestly state, I don't deal with this because it's not for me to deal with.
So also that's also the benefit of hiring sensitivity readers too. When you get to a certain point in your development, and that's people who specifically come from different backgrounds where they can read your work for those types of issues, and you can tell them like, yeah, I would like to hire you to read this over for issues regarding this or this, you know, whether it's race or sexuality or disability or anything really. You can just say, hey, these are issues I'm not sure if I handled appropriately or if I might be missing something. And you can have people look your work over, and that's what they do, is that they critically read over other people's work and provide
mental health and neurodiversity.
and provide that kind of feedback of like, hey, you should maybe consider changing this, or this isn't the best way to address that. And it's knowing that there are areas that you do not know enough about and turning to other people who do have that kind of knowledge. That's really the best way that you can do that sometimes.
So if you're going to be incorporating somebody else's story, bring somebody in, really bring someone in, hire them, bring someone who understands
and then listen to them.
Yes, oh my word.
Don't just
For
hire
God's
them.
sake.
Right?
Don't
No,
just hire them to like check it off on your list and then disregard everything they say. Don't do that.
Like, yes, I
Don't
paid
be
a
part of the
sensitivity
problem.
reader $30 an hour to read over this. And then when they sent their feedback, I never opened the document, but I did put their name in the credits. Like, don't do that.
And I will say, as
listen.
I will say, as somebody who does this within a certain framework, I'm very public about being autistic. And being a doctor of clinical psychology, I'm occasionally hired to do technical consultation and sensitivity reads for neurodiversity and mental health matters. Bring people in early in the process, because if you bring someone like me in when it's 90% completed and you can't do anything about all the feedback I have, what's the point even?
Right.
aside from checking the box. So bring people in as early as absolutely feasibly possible. Now, being cognizant that we have about 10 minutes left in the panel, we do have a couple of questions that from the audience, and one of them is related to one of the questions I had for you. And so, what do you know now about designing RPGs that you wish you knew when you started?
Everything.
Right?
Yeah, right.
I love it.
Okay, well then, what's some advice? Let's narrow that down because we talked about limitations. That's an incredibly open-ended question. If somebody's at the very start of their, I want to create an RPG,
Mhm.
what are some resources to look at and understand the scope of what they're
Read
foolishly
as
committing
many
to?
RPGs, play as many RPGs as you
Right.
can. Even if you can't play them all, read them all, or read once again as many as you can get your hands on, and do your best to kind of like create a mental list of the things that do and do not appeal to you.
Right.
About
Yeah.
different people's games. Right? We as a community are terrible at keeping track of the history of our art form, right? Like of our the system. We force designers to reinvent the wheel over and over again because
Yeah.
we're bad at letting them know that something already exists, or that something, like there's a game out there that took on the same kind of problem that you're doing, that you're taking on, and you should be informed about where they went with it, right?
Yep.
I talked to Luke Crane once talking about making Burning Wheel. And he had talked about how he was struggling with these particular bits of like the design and how to get with what he wanted for this. And it wasn't until like a year and a half into the process that he, for the first time, took a look at Pendragon and realized that like I just wasted a year and a half. Right?
Oh,
Like,
no.
what could I have done with
Right.
that time if I had known, that as usual, Greg Stafford, in fact, came up with it first, and
Right.
kind of thing.
I think
Right, And Luke is one of our, kind of like leading lights of the design industry, right? Like if he can miss stuff, that like was out there, we as a group need to be better about just kind of that we don't have that guy who went out recording all the blues, all the blues singers right before they died. I forgot the guy's Lomax or whatever, right? Like the guy who went out and made a point of getting all of these old blues designers, blues singers to play and record, in like the 40s, so that we have some kind of like history of that, right? We're very bad about having forgotten 50 years of design going backwards,
I think if you decide you want to write a game, your first major step is to ask yourself why, and really understand the why of why you want to build this thing. I am a person who loves diceless role-playing games, who is also a person that enjoys the randomizing effect of the decision engine that is a set of dice. So I decided to write a game that uses dice targeted to people who really like diceless games. So you can go a whole session without rolling dice if that's what you want to do, but there are also dice available to you if that's what you need in the moment as a GM. So that was my why. I wanted a dice inclusive game for people who like diceless role playing. And if you can understand your why, then you can get the kernel of your mechanic and branch out from there and go in whatever directions you want. But you have to know. You have to know why. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know what stands at the core of what you're about to embark upon.
Okay. Anybody else?
I mean, you can also reach out to the game design community. Most of us are very, very friendly and very open to sharing our advice. And also, once you get us started talking about designing stuff, we won't shut up. So,
right? Yeah. Fair cop.
Basically, if you can find like a Discord community or just a ring of people on Twitter that whose advice and whose designs you already respond to and like and feel like they're going in the same direction of what you're trying to achieve, reaching out to some of these people. Don't expect them to actually workshop anything for you, but just reach out to them and you'd be surprised how much people are willing to just kind of talk about different things, and you can learn a lot that way.
But also, many of us are available at a low hourly rate if you really
That's
do
true.
want to work something.
Also true, yes.
This is true.
Hey, people.
Come to events like this, right?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
Conventions
virtual conventions.
and-
Now that the world is reopening, go to live conventions in your neighborhood, in your area, and talk to people there about your design goals and what it is they do and what they're doing. So,
But don't let anything that we've said here scare you. If you have that drive, if you really, 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 really feel like it's worthwhile, pursue it. Do
right.
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we haven't scared you off yet, then you might be able
Go for
to,
it.
I say this to authors all the time, and I'll say this to aspiring game designers out there. Bookstores are big, and the
Yeah.
internet is infinite. If
Yeah.
you want to do a thing and create a thing, there is room for you. There is room for your voice. There is room for your stories. There is room for your ideas. Do not ever let a full bookshelf at the Barnes & Noble deter you, because there is room for you in this business. There is room for you in the arts. That you have a place. Come claim it.
Yeah.
I would go so far as to say the barriers to entry in the industry have literally never been lower in the
It's true.
50 years
That's
of our
very
history
true.
for this, especially for turning out products that look good.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that's, I used to be able to go through a convention hall and be able to point out which books were, printed by a professional printer and which ones were done POD
Absolutely.
and which one, et cetera. It's much harder to do that now because,
Yeah.
POD and all of those, the accessibility
So
of
much better.
design tools are so much better than they
And so
were when I
much cheaper.
started in this business so many years ago. It's
Yeah.
not even close. So
So being aware of our time, I do want to point out a couple of historical books that I have found useful in my understanding of things. One is the 4-volume set of Designers and Dragons.
Shannon, absolutely.
That does an amazing job. Also, anything written by John Peterson, his book Playing at the World, I consider to be as definitive as it gets as far as an academic work on the history of the creation of role-playing games. And it is so detailed. It is so ludicrously detailed. And John did an amazing job on that. So last question, and this is lightning round time. And let's wrap this up.
Right.
Let's wrap this up. Not only in where can people find you, but this question of if people can only take away 1 point from this panel, what do you want them to remember? And where can they find you? And let's go in reverse order from how we began. Sorry, Todd. We're starting with you.
You can do it. That's the one thing. That's the one thing. You can do it. And you can my author's website is todddowning.com. It's down there in my little picture window there. Deep7.com. Our stuff is available wide, especially through Drive-Thru RPG. Come find me.
Great. Awesome. All right, Darren, what do you want people to take away from this, and where can people find you?
Not only can you do it, absolutely, Todd's right, but you don't have to do the whole thing yourself, right? You can find people who can take you part of the way there. You can license a system and hack it. You can work with publishers who will help you get that vision that you have, onto people's tables. And you can find me, well, first of all, at explainthis.podbean.com, which is the home of the Explain This Comics Guys podcast. Most of my stuff, unlike Todd, I don't actually run my own company anymore. So most of my stuff is done, is found on various other companies' websites. If you want to find my most recent stuff, you can find me at Cubicle 7 for Doctor Who or Greater Than Games for Sentinels of the Multiverse.
Amazing. Manda.
Again, I am Manda the Ginger. It's right there on your screen on Twitter, and you should follow me because I'm hilarious. I'm also at thegingervillain.com when my Luddite self remembers to update my website, which incidentally was not this week. And yeah, you can, on my website, you can find links to buy all my books and short story anthologies and Cute Paranoia, which came out from Mongoose Publishing 2 years ago. I don't even remember now. It's been so long. But if you play that game and you encounter a sentient truck named Mac, that is in fact my little son that I tuckerized to the game. So it can be a lot of fun. And the thing that I want you to take away from this panel is to make the game you want to play. Don't let anyone tell you that what you're doing is not worthwhile because it's not going to make money or because it's not going to make you famous or because it's not going to get one of those little orange tags on Amazon. Make the game you want to play and let the fun be its own reward.
That's amazing. Amanda, take us home.
Oh boy. You can find me. My website is ageofnight.com. You can find me on Twitter at ageofnight and Instagram at Amanda Call Art. I also develop with the Skirmisher Publishing Development Group, so you can find us at skirmisher.com. And make sure that you are reaching out to other people and have your trusted circle to help you in your development of your game. Have those people that either you've reached out to online that you know are good at this kind of game stuff, or train your circle to be good at the game stuff to help you develop it. That was a very important thing too.
That's amazing. And I am Dr. B. You can find me on all the socials at the Dr. B, TheeDoctor, B as in boy. And if you have enjoyed this panel, make sure to keep up to date and follow check out superhero-fiction.com. Join the Discord up on the upper right-hand side of your screen. This fantastic series of panels, this online convention, is going to be going for 3 more days after this. So there's plenty of time to get plenty of more information from a whole wealth of independent authors, publishers, illustrators, creative types of all sorts. And we
great panels.
Panels. So we hope to see you in the Discord. We hope to see you back in the audience, and we'll see you soon. Thanks everybody.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.